What's up, guys? Welcome to Sir Kevin Says, episode number 11. Today I sit down with Joey Heredia, who is a remarkable drummer and percussionist. When I was very young, I wanted to study drums with Joey, but I never got a chance to because I couldn't get any transportation to go do any drum lessons with him. Fast forward many years later, and we're now doing a podcast. It's pretty amazing how life works sometimes. But a little bit about Joey. He's Los Angeles based. He is a studio drummer who blends a multitude of styles and skills to achieve a level of playing that makes him one of the best in the industry today. On tour, in the studio, or sharing the stage, his impressive list of credits include Tower of Power, Diego Amador, Sheila E, Stevie Wonder, Freddie Hubbard, Poncho Sanchez, Tania Maria, Dianne Reeves, Billy Childs, Gary Willis, Tribal Tech, Frank Gambale, Carole King, Manhattan Transfer, Joe Sample, Sergio Mendes, Alpert, Joe Farrell, Hubert Laws, Peggy Lee. The list goes on and on and on. Over the last decade, Joey has pursued his love for the art of flamenco and regularly shares the stage with many of the top flamenco artists from the U.S. and abroad. Spanish dancers Amador, Rojas, Domingo Ortega, and Alejandro Granados. He's currently involved in a project with the international flamenco artist and pianist and singer Diego Amador. On special occasions, Joey can be seen playing drums with Grammy Award-winning piano jazz legend Billy Childs. Joey is proud to be part of the faculty staff at the Los Angeles School of Music in Pasadena, California. He also has his own recording studio called Groove Gallery Burbank, where he records and produces many of the projects he's involved in. His jazz fusion group El Trio, with Marco Mendoza on bass and vocals, and Renato Neto on keys, is known the world over. As I mentioned before, Joey's a phenomenal drummer. I wanted to study Afro-Cuban drumming with him, along with Jimmy Brantley, Horacio Negro Hernandez, Raul Pineda, all guys that really have the grasp on this style of music. And I saw Joey as one of these top drummers that really would just had great feel, great timing, and understood the music. Today's podcast is more so for the drummer. So if you play drums and percussion, this is a podcast for you because we talk about endorsements. We talk about his perspective on drumming, his use of the 8-inch tom, which I found that he is very popular for, what he continues to be inspired by, and his love for music. So check it out. Let me know what you guys think. Episode number 11. Here you go. Welcome to episode number 11 of Sir Kevin Says. Today I'm sitting down with drummer extraordinaire, innovator, percussionist, Joey Heredia.
All right,
how you doing, Joey?
Right. Never had it so good.
Thanks for doing this, man.
You're welcome.
What are you up to these days, bro?
Oh, wow. Getting ready for the NAMM show that's coming to L.A. Next week because what day are we at? Thursday of the week before NAMM. And preparing for that. Did a gig a couple weeks ago with Billy Childs, the famous jazz piano player. We did a gig at the Blue Whale
Incredible
Jazz Club here in L.A. So next week there's a few things going on. There's my 5th annual Latin NAMM blowout, which is actually at a killer club that has killer sound, and it's right across the alley from my home, so it makes it comfortable. It becomes like a big hang between the club and my house because people come over to turn it into a party here as well. It's going to be jam-packed. A lot of celebrities will be showing up. Like over the years, people like, Alex Acuna and Luis Conte have stopped by to play with us, Richie Garcia. So you never know who's going to drop by at that particular gig. And there's a lot of name guys in the industry that are playing in several bands. There's, I think I told you the name of the Peruvian ensemble? Chacombo, that's right. Yeah. Chacombo's a killer LA-based Peruvian music ensemble and dance. And it's killer. It's really beautiful. It's one of my favorite styles of music that I haven't set the time yet to dive in like I have on all the other genres, but
Yeah.
it's something that I'm looking at little by little.
Sure.
So I'm lucky that they did it last year and everyone got excited. So we're
Yeah, they were
having
incredible.
them.
They were really, really good.
Yeah. Oh, you were there.
Yeah, I
That's
was there.
right.
I went
That's
last
right.
year. I saw them. They performed. There was also a woman on percussion.
Oh,
I think she's Argentinian.
She is. She's from Buenos Aires.
Buenos Aires. She
Yeah.
was
I
incredible.
think she's pretty bad little girl. She's coming again, I heard, but God, and I feel bad because I know her. That her name escapes me right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's someone to look at
Yeah.
in the future.
Definitely.
I got 2 other bands for this Tuesday after Chacombo. I have a group called Navarro. It's a piano player buddy of mine. We both teach part-time we're faculty over at the Los Angeles College of Music.
Nice.
That's run by Ralph Humphrey and Joe Porcaro for the drum department.
Wow.
I'm in the drum department. I'm also in the bass department, and I oversee all the Latin, like Cuban and Brazilian ensembles that the school has when we get around to addressing that. It's an accredited college of music.
Yes.
And
How long have you been there?
well, good question. I think it's 7 years.
7
now.
years. Okay.
Yeah, it happened by accident. I was asked to fill in for a bass player. I don't play bass, but they had a bass player whose name I won't mention. It was taking care of the bass Latin studies there. And then they made a change, and the head of the bass department, Jerry Watts, who's a named bass player, he hit me up and said, would you be interested in doing this? At first I said no. I wanted more money. I didn't want to go 2 days a week, maybe 1 day a week. I didn't want to go in the morning. And then he accommodated everything. It was pretty cool. He says, how about 3 in the afternoon?
Perfect.
So perfect. And just go for like a couple of hours back to back. And that was really cool. And I didn't think much of it. I had taught at MI in the substitute staff back in the late 80s into the 90s, right before the Japanese company bought them. And when that happened, Ralph Humphrey and Joe Porcaro, they split and they started what was called LAMA, LA Music Academy,
yes.
that turned into Los Angeles College of Music because of their accreditation.
Right.
Went through. So Ralph and Joe went. I didn't really go with them. I just said, I don't want to do this at MI anymore because they had slashed the salaries. So we didn't do it. It was a shame at the time. But so I was already playing with everyone I had done a couple of records already with Frank Gambale by then.
Wow.
I did a live in LA, which was one of the first records that really put me on the map in a big way. There were other records I did before that with Billy Childs, with Dianne Reeves, who's now like the best jazz singer in the world. I did her first record. So there were all these cool boutique kind of CDs or records that I was when I started recording, they were records, they weren't CDs. And my career was moving in a really good direction. It seemed like every month somebody new was calling me, Joe Sample, Manhattan Transfer, Sergio Mendes, Herb Alpert, Hubert Laws, and it was great gigs. Like Hubert would call and say, oh yeah, we're going to Carnegie Hall and the bill's with Bob James, so we're going to go early and we have a big string section. So I was getting spoiled in my 20s because with great gigs. Yes. I first got my first big gig, I suppose, was when I was 19, playing with Dianne Reeves on a steady basis in town. And Billy Childs was in that band. And then,
so you've known Billy for years now.
I was, I think, 18, 19 when we met. I was right out of high school or high school, and we met at a rehearsal. Wow. And the rehearsal was there was a guitar player here in LA, still lives here, named Joe Calderon, and he was a guitar player in the big band at East LA College, where I started after high school.
Okay. And
I got into the big band right away, playing drums, obviously. And this guy, Joe Calderon, and I hit it off because he was a jazzer. And we started trying to just jam on the side away from school. Let's put some little groups together. So he and I, we got this trumpet player who's now the head of the ethnomusicology department at UCLA. He's a famous guy. He's written a lot of books. His name is Steve Loza.
Okay.
He's, a big-time educator in that field, but he was a jazz trumpet player also in the beginning, and still, tries to stay up on the trumpet with ensembles that he does either at UCLA or what have you.
Yeah.
And we did it at his pad because I knew him. I had met him when I was 17. I started on my 16th birthday. I got a drum set from Pro Drum. It's set up in the other room right next to this one, and I. At 17, I wanted to play already, like a year into playing. And I told my dad, I want to play in groups. He says, well, go play in groups then. So I looked at, back then, everything was in the classified section of a newspaper, whether they were the LA Times or it was like, neighborhood newspapers with certain names just for the barrio here or there. And I looked in the classified section. It said, what did it say? Something like auditioning a drummer and a keyboard player for a top 40 band. And it turned out to be a few blocks from my pad, like 4 blocks or something away. My dad drove me over. I set up the drums. It was a top 40 band with horns, couple brothers that played. And I got the gig, and Steve Loza got the gig, but on piano.
Okay.
Instead of trumpet, because they already had a trumpet player in the band. And so we hit it off, and he had just graduated from Cal Poly Pomona with a music degree, and he kind of became my mentor. Like, my mentor in the sense that the most important thing that I ever learned from music was how to listen to music. So he exposed me to a lot of jazz and a lot of classical music. And without saying anything, showed me how to listen to all these various styles. So it opened up my mind, my musical mind right away. At first I wanted to be like a big name, pop, rock, whatever, drummer, like everybody else on the magazines and all that stuff. And when I met Steve Loza, he turned me around. He made me see music in another way, totally turned me all the way around. I have him to thank till I die, for that. Everyone should be lucky enough to have someone like that in their life. And so he was already educating people, didn't even realize it, So I got in that band, I started working, and then that led to another top 40 band and another top 40 band. All East LA top 40 bands, because I grew up in Boyle Heights, which is, one of the barrios there in LA. It's Lincoln Heights, City Terrace, El Sereno, Boyle Heights, and East LA. But when people refer to it, they just refer to all of them as East LA because it's east of downtown LA. Right. And so, those bands that was like boot camp for me, playing in a band like that was modeled after Tower of Power with 2 to 4 horns each of these bands had. And I just kind of graduated from a better band to a better band to a better band, away from Steve Loza. And then he went and got his master and his PhDs in education, ethnomusicology. And then I just started working. And then at 19, meeting Billy at a rehearsal at Steve Loza's house that Joe Calderon, the guitar player, had helped put together. And he says, I know this bass player, this black bass player named Billy Carroll, who has since died. He was like a great, great bass player. And he said, Billy Carroll said that he knows a guy named Billy Childs that plays with Freddie Hubbard. Billy was already playing with the great Freddie Hubbard, jazz trumpet player. While he was going to USC, he would go do gigs on the side with Freddie Hubbard. So he got this guy, Billy Carroll, to bring Billy Childs to the rehearsal, to the jam, which we were all excited. What, the piano player with Freddie Hubbard? That was big time for me. I was like at East LA College, just transferring over to LA City College, which is another JC on Vermont in Hollywood. And so I went to one of the first classes, or actually it was the first meeting, I think, of a concert hour that as a music major or not non-music major, you had access to. I think it was every Tuesday at 12 noon, if I remember, at LA City College. They had like a concert. It could be a string quartet, a chamber ensemble, whatever. And here was Dianne Reeves coming up to play with Billy Childs and Larry Klein, who was a name bass player who played with Freddie Hubbard for years, and a drummer named Joe Carrero that used to play with Al Jarreau. He was on that first Al Jarreau, I think it was a double set album, live album. Joe Carrero was playing drums. Wonderful drummer, man. Super musical. And he took my ear to the side, and I said, wow, what is this? And then I was lucky enough to have them play at this concert hour. I immediately went and hit them up, and I had met Billy already at the rehearsal. And then I had met Dianne Reeves with a jazz gig I did with a top 40 singer, female singer, at a jazz club in Venice Beach, and Dianne came by. So, I had met all these people separate from each other.
Yeah.
And then they found out that we all knew each other, and Billy said, let me make sure I have your number. And then before I knew it, we were playing together with a guitar player named Nick Kyrgo, who was a guitar player for J.J. Johnson, who was a famous jazz trombonist. So it was a killer band with Billy Carroll, the bass player, who had brought Billy Childs to that. and we all fell in love with each other's playing, meaning Billy Carroll, Billy Childs, and myself, because I had already played with the other guys. But they were like, yeah, what shall we jam on? So we would jam on some standards. Very important for people to learn, boot camp songs, which could be anything from pop rock to top 40 to jazz standards.
Exactly.
Because those type of styles will follow you always, whether you're involved with them or not.
Right.
In a big way. So I always encourage people to do that. So Billy Childs, in the middle of the rehearsal, says, you know that a tune by Herbie Hancock from the Thrust record album from the 70s, early 70s, called Actual Proof. And I said, yeah, I know it. I don't play with anyone that knows how to play it because it's really difficult too.
Yeah.
And so he said, well, let's try it, because the bass player and him both knew it. And we ripped it. And then we kept in touch, and then that's how my playing with Billy escalated. And we played every week for, it must have been 2, 3, 4 years along with Dianne Reeves.
Wow.
At a couple different jazz clubs in LA. And then from there I went to Tania Maria. She's a Brazilian jazz piano player and singer. She was very famous years ago. She has a lot of records out. I did one record with her. John Pena was on bass, and Alex Acuna was on drums, and me on drums, and
Nice.
and Abe Laboriel Sr. was on bass as well, along with.
So multiple people were contributed to the album.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And that was like one of the first records I did. I did Dianne Reeves' first record. I did some early recordings with Billy Childs, and then I got in with Tania Maria when I was 21 years old.
Wow.
Back then, a lot of the artists would say, come. There was no audition. Your audition was at a gig. They figured like the best way to find out whether you could do a gig or not was to do the gig,
Yeah.
right? It wasn't like auditioning. You can't really do, those type of auditions don't really make sense. Especially cattle calls where you have one guy after another on the same drum set or on the same bass rig. That's absurd. It's ridiculous. That's like trying to explain someone what your home is like, but you're not going to go to their home. You know?
That's good. That's it.
And so they said, well, we got a 2-week run, like a week in Vancouver, Canada at a jazz club, 5-6 nights, and then another 2-3 nights in Portland, another 2-3 nights in Seattle. I think that was the run. And I did well, so the gig was mine. And then I turned 22 shortly thereafter. And then we were on the road. We were doing jazz festivals like Montreux Jazz Festival,
Nice.
The Hague, and the North Sea Jazz Festival, other jazz festivals in Japan. And that catapulted me because I was playing with Tania Maria, and we were going on right after Steps Ahead, for example. It would be like Steps Ahead, then us, and then VSOP2, which was Ron Carter, Herbie Hancock, Tony Williams, and the Marcellus brothers. And then so I was in that company, right? It was a great era to grow up in music.
Definitely.
And in a lot of ways, Tania became another sort of mentor because she used to like to use younger musicians. John Pena and I are the same age, so we were both like, he was already doing it at 21, and they basically got me to do it because like Alex Acuna couldn't or wouldn't do the gig because it didn't pay enough. But then that's where a younger guy like me would slip in. And so, through my 20s, that just kept going. Frank Gambale, like I said before, 2 records, Thunder from Down Under, and the Live at the Baked Potato, Live in L.A., I think it was called, or Live at the Baked Potato. No, Live, simply Live.
Live, okay.
And then did, touring and with Joe Sample, Manhattan Transfer, did gigs with Robben Ford. Then I started getting to know Scott Henderson and Gary Willis, the bass player, because they were teaching at MI while I was in the sub-staff there in the late 80s. And then we were playing more and more together that the transition that they made with a group that they had called Tribal Tech. And then Tribal Tech, they were like, do you want to join us with Tribal Tech? And I was like, are you kidding me? Because I had already been into their stuff. And we had already been playing a lot of gigs together, just jazz gigs where you'd go and play standards, but fusion them out, And so, like, configurations would be like Scott Henderson, John Patitucci, me, or Scott Henderson, Billy Childs, Gary Willis, and myself. So we were all playing with each other, every other week, some sort of little ensemble. And I joined Tribal Tech. And we did killer gigs, festivals, and more than anything, we started planning to do a CD, like their most ambitious CD, because up to then, they were great CDs, but this one they really wanted to work out.
Okay.
And I turned down a lot of gigs, I think Gino Vanelli and Diana Ross, different gigs that were mentioned to me, like, hey, would you be interested in doing this gig or that gig? And I was like, no, I'm involved with Tribal Tech.
Yeah. So you're very committed to
I remember asking my mom too, because my mom was bring me back to this subject.
Okay.
I'm going to go off for a second. My mom was a famous singer in Latin America in the 1930s and 40s and into the 50s.
Okay.
But I'm talking huge international singer. Based out of Mexico City. She sang the bolero, and the bolero was pretty much Mexico's gift to the world.
Yes.
For anyone that knows anything about music or Cuban music or what have you. And so my mom was a famous bolero singer that traveled all around Latin America and even this side of the United States, California, New Mexico.
Did you travel with her as well?
No. This was before I was born.
Okay.
And so she understood parts of the business because she was a singer, and my father was a type of studio drummer in LA back in those times. So they would do gigs together and once in a while recordings. And so my dad, though, unfortunately, he bought me my drum set when I was 16. Then he died when I was 17 of a heart attack.
Oh, wow.
And before that, my mom didn't want me to play drums, even though I had expressed an interest since I can ever remember dreaming or breathing. I wanted to play the drums, but my mom was, no, let's not let him. Well, I was constantly making a big deal out of it. So finally they said, okay, let's get him a kit. When I was 16 and my grades were getting worse.
Oh.
And we're in East LA and there's gangs and, I be honest with you, I started witnessing my first murder that I witnessed was when I was 16.
Wow.
So it was like a rough neighborhood. And that was like a couple blocks, 4 blocks from my pad, like literally on the block behind the first audition I had with that Top 40 band. It was like all in the same neighborhood. So, we used to have to watch ourselves there. And, but my dad got me the kit, passed away at 17. Then I started plugging away, and then it led up to that point. So I remember asking my mom, what should I do? Like, I'm getting called for some good gigs. Should I let Tribal Tech go? But this record with them is going to be really something.
Yes.
Just do what makes you happy. So I chose the Tribal Tech thing. And of course, I mean, who wouldn't?
Yeah.
With Scott Henderson on guitar and Gary Willis on bass. And we worked hard on that record. We rehearsed every Wednesday at MI in one of the kind of smaller concert rooms / classrooms.
Okay.
Every Wednesday we would rehearse, and every Sunday we would play at the Baked Potato. We had a residency there.
Wow.
There'd be lines to get into the Baked Potato, and we would hot rod the tunes out and make them even better than they were already. But so the extraordinary thing about that particular record CD, it's a purple record with a picture of both Scott and Gary Willis on it, because it was their band.
Right.
And it was called, I think, Tribal Tech, Scott Henderson, Gary Willis, something like that. And the extraordinary thing is that we rehearsed it like a pop record, meaning like, to rehearse that much on a jazz record was pretty much uncalled for like months, every Wednesday, and then for months every Sunday at the same time playing the Baked Potato. Just bands didn't do that. Maybe one or two rehearsals, and then they would cut the record.
Yeah.
But we rehearsed everything,
Man.
parts, sounds, even, I would maybe do a drum fill, keep that drum fill right there.
And it's about
and
retaining
then Gary Willis would put, a bass line on top of it, linked up with the drum fill, or vice versa. I'd hear a basic, and then I'd put, and so we were very meticulous, like to the point where we hated each other. We really did. We were like, David Goblat was the piano player at the time. At the end of the record and that whole sequence of events, he split, and then I left. I went back to do some gigs here and there with Tribal Tech after that, when they were stuck and maybe they didn't have somebody or something happened, and I would come to the rescue, and we'd go to Chile or Buenos Aires or somewhere and do a hit or two. So that was cool that I, still had a relationship with them. But it was exhausting, to work that hard on a record. But it was completely worth it. Sometimes the musical situations you're in don't necessarily pan out in a long sense, meaning like a 20-year span.
Of course.
But if it's going to work for a year, then go for it for the year,
right,
and then do something else after. But at least commit to it and get it done, even if there's little conflicts,
Yeah.
And so that went really well. That turned everything around, and then I started a trio with Marco Mendoza, who's a great rock bass player, but people don't know unless they come and see us play or have heard the live CD we did at a jazz club that was called La Ville.
Yes.
Back in the old days that you know about and everybody here. And that trio started out, and I tell this story to people to encourage them to make something happen. A friend of mine, one of my best friends, his name is Ronnie Gutierrez. He's a percussionist and drummer here in LA, works a lot. And he told me once years ago, there's three kind of people: those that make it happen, those that watch it happen, and those that don't know what's happening. and I thought, well, that's kind of ridiculous. But then when I stopped to think about it, I thought, man, that's really profound.
Yeah, it is.
Like, which one are you? Are you like the guy that makes it happen? Right. Or are you the guy that watches it happen? Or are you the guy that doesn't know what's happening? I want to be the guy that makes it happen, right? Yeah. So, I had early on been aggressive in that respect, trying to make things happen by making a top 40 gig happen, by doing gigs with Billy Childs and Dianne Reeves, And so Marco Mendoza goes to La Vallée before they were a jazz club. They just had Brazilian music 3-4 nights a week. And he said, what nights are you dark? He said, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. He said, can you give me Tuesday night of next month, like the first Tuesday? The owner goes, to do what? He said, I want to bring some friends in. We're going to play some standards and just have fun, and we'll get a bunch of people here. So between he and I, we knew a lot of people. I was already had a name, and so it attracted a lot of people.
Yeah.
And we had, I remember it was Amador Ruiz was on piano. He was the first piano player. He hadn't been in LA very long at that time.
Okay.
And we ripped it, and the owner said, man, can you guys come back next week, the same Tuesday? There was no cover and everything. I think he gave us $50 each or something. And we said, yeah, sure. And so and then the same thing happened. A bunch of people came. It was a big hit. Can you guys come back again? And at the end of the month, he says, can you come back every Tuesday for next month? And we said, cool. Until Tuesday, we were locked into Tuesdays. Well, this Tuesday thing went on for 25 years.
Wow.
Right? For the first 10 to 15, we weren't on the road much, so we were there almost every Tuesday. It wasn't until after 10, 15 years that the guys started going out. By then we had another piano player, Renato Neto.
Yes.
Renato Neto from Brazil. He played with Prince for years. And he became the piano player that we did the CD with. He was the guy. And that was a marvelous run because we got to take tunes that we loved by people like Stevie Wonder, Weather Report, or whatever, and trick them out and hot rod them out where they were completely different tunes.
Right.
But that's because we were working so much. We did the Tuesday night at La Vallée, Wednesday night at another blues club, and Thursday night at another club, all on the same boulevard, a mile from each other.
Wow.
So we were playing 3 gigs, and then we had Fridays and Saturday gigs on and off. So every other week we'd have a Friday and Saturday, or we'd have just a Saturday at other joints.
Okay.
So we're well, we don't get together to ever rehearse, so what can we do with Living for the City by Stevie Wonder?
That's one of my favorites, actually.
Oh, it's my favorite too,
my
actually.
favorite,
it's
man.
actually
That
my
intro,
favorite. It's pretty bad.
Yeah, it's cool.
And so,
cool.
We were just doing so many gigs, and so as not to get bored, we'd add stuff and, let's put a solo here, let's put a riff here. And Renato was brilliant at coming up with parts, whether they were horn parts or just, parts that would, make you want to pull your face off. You go, man, this is totally killer. And so, we kept that Tuesday night gig. So when the guys would leave with Prince or Marco would leave with his rock bands, I would try to duke it out and stay in LA. And I'd put bands together, really cool bands, and I'd keep the Tuesday going as much as I could.
Okay.
And because it was almost always my priority to try to stay in town more than out of town, which is why I ended up doing so much session work. I came in after the era of Jeff Vaccaro and Carlos Vega, who incidentally both of them helped me out a lot, helped put me on the map by actually telling people, contractors and people like that about me. Oh yeah, there's this young drummer. If I can't do it, or Carlos would say, if I can't do it or Jeff can't do it, just call this kid. And Jeff would believe it or not, would let me sit in on his drums at the Baked Potato when he was playing with David Garfield or someone, Los Lobotomies or whatever. And if there was a Weather Report tune from the Heavy Weather record, which was Alex and Manolo, then they would, sometimes Jeff would say, Joey's here, just get Joey to play, let me take a break. He wanted to have a drink, and he says, I don't know how to play that Latin stuff, let me do it. And it was always my idea that to take rhythms, Latin rhythms, Cuban rhythms, and Brazilian, but a lot of Cuban rhythms, and take them and put them on the kit. Yeah. And other drummers had been doing that already. When I was doing it, there were guys that were doing it. Would hear something, a salsa number, a Latin jazz thing, and try to see how we could make that work. So my take on it was, instead of, how should I put it, jazz drummers that wanted to play Latin rhythms on the kit approached it as a jazz drummer.
Okay.
They would like Alex Acuna would listen to Elvin Jones, for example.
Sure.
How did he play Afro-Cuban rhythms, jazz rhythms on the kit? And then Alex would start doing his own trip, and different drummers were doing that. And so the way they were doing that was that, the way I like to explain it is, they were playing from the waist up. They were like playing jazz, but turning it into Latin, into Cuban stuff. It was very much a jazz approach. I wanted to come from the bottom up, from the feet up, and make it sound like it was 2, 3, 4 guys playing, but like a train.
Yeah, yeah.
So I asked myself early on, before I had met Jeff Porcaro and before he had helped me, that what if Jeff Porcaro had ever learned how to play Latin rhythms on the kit? What would he have sounded like? And that's been my approach for years. Whether I have reached that goal or not is another thing. I think I'm always still working on it, but it's to play a little bit more heavy-handed, not rock, but just a little heavier from the bottom up as opposed to from the waist up.
Definitely.
If that makes sense. It makes sense, I think, to drummers.
Yes.
And probably to everybody else too, because it's not a hard concept to imagine.
Right.
So that's what happened in my career as a studio drummer. There was still studio work, not as much as when Jeff and Carlos were alive, but there were things left. Now there's virtually, the scene has pretty much died. You know, it's nothing like it was before.
Right.
But I always wanted to stay in town to learn a new genre of music. So I did a lot of big bands, tons of big bands when I was in high school. Not high school, when I was in college, right after high school.
Did you learn how to read music in high school or in college?
In college.
In college, okay.
Yeah. I was beginning to in high school, but we had no music department.
Oh, okay.
So there was no music available. And I taught myself what I could. My dad showed me a couple things, but he died right away.
Right.
And then, so I started showing myself more stuff. And then when I was 19, I think it was 20, I started studying with Murray Spivak, who was the guy that taught like Carlos Vega, Louis Belson, from Tower of Power. Drummer.
David Garibaldi?
David Garibaldi.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And so David Garibaldi, like I ended up subbing for him for a handful of gigs over the years with Tower. It was a great experience because Rocco was still playing bass with them. And so anyway, back then, David Garibaldi went to him actually on my recommendation. He went and studied with Murray Spivak. So Murray had a long list of Vinnie Colaiuta went for some lessons.
Wow.
A lot of guys studied with him. I didn't do the whole program with him, but I did enough to have a really good handle on Murray's method, which, in my opinion, given with the way drumming has evolved, nobody's really addressing the Murray Spivak method to the modern drummer now. Okay. I think I'm the only guy that's doing that. So I have like a good handful of guys that have graduated from LACM, and other guys that come to me privately that are either doing it full steam ahead or they're doing it as part of the lessons that I do with them. We engage ourselves in Murray Spivak stuff. I don't consider it mandatory if someone wants to study with me that they do that. Yeah. But as soon as I start showing them the dynamics and the approach of that method, they want to check it out because nobody else is really addressing it, you know.
Can you explain a little bit of what it's like?
That's a good idea. Yeah, I'll try to make it short. You play drums, so you know that if you're playing match grip, for example,
right?
There's the German method, palms down. There's the French method, thumbs up, and in between those two, now there's what's referred to as the American method, which is being thrown around at schools. Because I first heard it, on the street, but not that much in the street, more so at the school, because we have these students come from all over the world.
Yeah.
And I ask her, like, what's your game? French or American. And, what's American? So I started looking at that a little bit more at the school. I noticed that throughout the years I stayed pretty religious to my approach,
Sure.
using Murray's techniques.
Okay.
So I didn't really bust up what he originally had showed me, although when you take these three into consideration, the French, the German, and the American, and then you have offshoots of those three, you have interpretations of each of those three that people adopt, or that they learn from a teacher, or that they pass on to students, and on and on and on and on. Well, what happened was that the French and the German methods, these methods were orchestral methods. The drum set happened as a big accident, right? It's not like it was planned out.
Right.
If you told someone a little over 100 years or whatever it was ago that you and I were going to be like we beat on things and people would give us money, you would say that's absurd. Yeah. Go become a carpenter or whatever. Yeah. But people give me money for beating on things.
Right.
But it wasn't planned out. You had these orchestras with violins and cellos and oboes and violas and what have you, and you had a snare drum, an orchestral snare drum, and you had a big bass drum on a stand that they would hit.
Right.
You had suspended cymbals to do crescendo rolls on. You had, big crash cymbals to augment what was done on timpanis and with big orchestras. So basically the drum set was taken from these orchestral instruments and formed into a drum set. Yeah. Right? And along the way, these methods were orchestral methods for holding the sticks and playing. Right? So it wasn't meant at all to be what it's become today, meaning hit as loud and as fast as you can, which, the last
Go out your arm kind of deal.
Last I checked, I think Vinnie Caliuta said this once, last I checked, that drumming was an art form. And it was an art form, and in a lot of ways it has gotten away from that, in my opinion. But that's a whole nother discussion that I wouldn't mind engaging myself with someone if they got a couple of hours and they want to debate it or whatever. But so Murray Spivak had this 3-finger grip with the first 3 fingers, the index, the middle finger, and the thumb. Okay. And then the middle finger, the first joint of the middle finger was the fulcrum, the stick laid right in there. Okay. And then with that, the first finger, the index finger, and the thumb were a pivot for the stick to go like that. Mm-hmm. But it never leaves the fulcrum, which is the first joint of the middle finger. And it was literally just a 3-finger grip, palms down, German style. Not and your thumb and the index finger, the thumb goes in between the first joint and the second joint of your index finger. Originally, Murray Spivak in the old days, and I'm talking 40s, 50s, and into the 60s, and when I studied with him in the late 70s, he said to put the thumb on the stick and the stick in the first joint of your first finger. Well, guess what? Like, if you want to play balls out, you're going to blow out that joint, which started happening to me a little bit, especially to my left side, because that was my backbeat. Yeah. And then I started finding out that, okay, if you put it in between both joints, this one and this one, instead of the stick in the first joint of the first finger, and you put it gently in there, you didn't disrupt the pivot. It still stayed in the balance point, which was the first joint of the middle finger. And then, but you could hit harder with less effort.
Yeah.
Murray's method was always with less effort.
So kind of like the Bruce Lee approach, the 1-inch punch kind of deal. Or
Well, that's a interesting thing. Yeah. And I love to teach it, mind you. It goes way beyond that, because there's a video that Murray did, and he died halfway through it, not in the middle of a shoot, but it was before the whole series of it was a lesson with Louis Belson before Belson had died, because Louis Belson had studied with Murray. Murray was a Jewish guy from New York who came to LA and had such great ears that he got into the film industry, and he was responsible for the effects, sound effects and sound and all that for the original King Kong movie.
Wow.
And still to this day at the Academy Awards from time to time, that category of which Murray paved the way for, they give it up to Murray, and they say, "Oh, special thanks to Murray Spivak for paving the way on what we want today, this Academy Award." So he was a bad dude, meaning his ears were impeccable.
Yes.
He could tell what you were doing without looking at you with your hands, and the whole thing. Every stroke had to be even and sound exactly the same,
right?
And on and on and on and on. He was a great teacher. And it's a method that's been long gone and nobody addresses it. I think Chad Wackerman tried to address the rudiments of that method on a series of shows or videos he did on Drum Channel, but it doesn't hone in. He didn't hone in, I don't think, into the ABCs of every single finger and joint,
exactly.
and what it represents, what it does, what it doesn't do, and that's what Murray did, and that's what I do when I sit down with guys. So it's not about playing harder or louder, but if you came to me, for example, I could guarantee you that you're going to see a lot of big differences in a very short period of time, and you're going to be more relaxed. Your time's going to be better, and you're going to be able to hit harder with less effort. So, and hitting harder didn't come from Murray, because he was still in the vibe of having the stick in the first joint.
Right.
Well, when he finally did that that video with Louis Belson, he was talking about putting it in between, putting the thumb between the two joints. Obviously, because more and more drummers, like myself, were coming from the era of the modern drummer. Steve Gadd was the godfather, by the way, of the modern drummer. Before that, you had jazz drummers, you had this drummer, that drummer, that. But Steve Gadd came out and he did it all, everything.
Yeah.
Rock, studio work, jazz.
And still doing it all.
Swing, and so all of us were like, that's why modern drummer was called modern drummer. Because this was like the new modern drummer. It wasn't so everything, exercises, how you hold the sticks were changing to accommodate these guys that wanted to hit harder or had to hit harder, because there were no mics on their drums, and there was a stack of Marshalls next to them on one side and a stack of acoustic bass speakers on the other side. So things got a little out of hand, and the drummers took a beating. You notice that early jazz drummers played traditional grip. I studied match grip with Murray Spivak. He asked all his drummers that went to him, "You want to study matched or you want to study traditional?" So I opted to study match because I was already playing match because I had to hit harder, and I was playing with Billy Childs already.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of like the gist with Murray Spivak. I tried to take what he showed. I added the fourth finger, which turned it into a four-finger grip as opposed to a three-finger orchestral grip.
Yeah.
Added the fourth finger for stability and to be able to hit harder. And if you want to, you can even get off the fourth finger a little bit while you're doing something delicate, and you'll notice that the three-finger grip can actually accommodate certain things that you're doing, press rolls or other things like that. The whole idea was to keep the pinky off the stick for Murray, and that was because it's considerably smaller
Right.
than the middle finger. And if you try to wrap the pinky around the stick, you're going to start doing a thumbs up method. And that defeats the idea of the grip, which is a palms down German method. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. It does,
cool.
definitely,
Yeah,
definitely.
I hope I'm making myself clear, because it gets complicated. It's something that I do in a 2-3 hour sitting. Yeah. When the first lesson they come to me, we kick it for it, and it's not uncommon for a student of mine and me to kick it for 4 or 5 hours. Wow. Because we examine that and we examine how it could jump in, and I don't even go charging by the hour for 4 or 5 hours. Wow. I make it a homeboy thing, and I say, look, the first lesson, pay me what you would for an hour, but we'll extend it as long as it's going to take for you to understand what I'm trying to get over to you. And it turns out to be a great thing. So the pinky, we stay off the stick, and we don't allow it to stick out, but we just keep it right there. And I even tell guys, man, if you're playing a really tough gig where it's a big rock gig or fusion gig, and you got to put your pinky on the stick, do it, but then get it off the stick immediately. That's like two fighters in the ring, and you can't possibly be engaged round after round after round, nonstop brawling. Right. The idea is to create some tension, and then there's release to the tension. Exactly. Always release to the tension. Yes. In that way, martial arts, if for those of you that know martial arts, I don't know if you do, I don't, but it comes in handy. Yeah. Tension and release in terms of executing a punch. So when we have to hit the drum, we have tension and we have release. So Murray Spivak called that the up and down stroke. Up for the release, down for the tension. Down meant also that you pulled in a little bit on the stick. Right. But once your elbow started coming out to break the wrist slightly, then you could get the stick up in the air. Yeah. Turn the bead around to have a nice, perfect downstroke. So an upstroke, you can't have a killer downstroke without a wonderfully beautiful upstroke. Right. The upstroke is what leads everything off. If you have, an upstroke that's flawed, then your downstroke's going to be completely flawed.
Right, and the sound is always going to change, because you're never going to be consistent enough with it,
Right, right. So then the up and down stroke means everything to us. Right. Those of us that study with Murray. Yeah. And anyway, I think.
No, that's good. That Joey, you're sharing some great stuff, man. I mean, stuff that I wasn't even aware of. Alex here and Danny. You've been with DW for how many years now?
I think I got in with them at around 84, 85, 86, somewhere around there.
Were they searching for you, or did you search for them, or did you happen to meet them somewhere? How did that get going?
It was a little of both. The way it happened for me, there was this drummer who became a type of A&R guy for different companies named Phil Hulsey. He was a beautiful guy. And he had seen me play, I think, with a big band at a club in Santa Monica. And it may have been a band that also was, there were different groups that I played with there. There were small ensembles and big bands. And to make a long story short, Shelly Manne, the famous jazz drummer, was playing there once, and I played, I think, before him, and he heard me play, or after him, and then, and I was a fan of his already, and he expressed an interest in just telling people about me, along with this guy Phil Hulsey that would go and see me play as well. They were music lovers, even though they were drummers. And so they started telling people about me. Shelly Manne told some people about me. And Phil Hulsey told the DW. He told Don Lombardi. And this was when they had just moved from Downey to not Oxnard where they're at now, but it was Downey to, can't remember the area. And they just had a couple little bungalows. It was a boutique company. Wow. And Phil Hulsey took me over there. and introduced me and said, Don, this is a kid I told you about. He's not a drummer that's gonna come in and go out. He's gonna come in and he's gonna stick around for a long time. He's already playing, well and doing a lot of stuff. So Don Lombardi gave me an endorsement with the pedals, right? And it was a double pedal.
Nice.
And I had never played a double pedal or a double bass drum kit. I was like, what do I do with this? But then I figured a couple of, little things to kind of jump on and work on, and then little by little, I was raised to not ask for anything, to work for whatever I had. It just wasn't cool, like to ask, oh, give me this, give me that, give me that, give me this. It's like my dad, you want to play in a band? Go play in a band then. Go for it, look for it. I always wanted to not be affiliated with, Joey Heredia from this band. I wanted it to be Joey Heredia, for some reason or other. And so I thought, well, if I stay independent with my name and not take the first endorsement that comes up or try to chase down an endorsement just to say I have an endorsement. Mm-hmm. I love DW. I want to play DW. So I'm just going to stay quiet about it and hope that then sure enough, one day, John Good hit me up and said, yeah, we noticed you're doing this and you're doing that and you're doing that and you're doing this. Because word gets around.
Definitely.
If people play or they're onto something. And he said, we want to give you a kit. He took me to eat to tell me that, And I was like, man, I was so excited. Yeah, come over. He said, come over to the factory and we'll pick out the shells together, you and I. And then you'll pick out the color or the wrap, whatever you want, and then it'll be done. But in the meantime, take this kit that's sitting on the side there. It was scratched up, like a red fire engine red kit. It wasn't really good looking. It wasn't a Sparkle kit. It was just a kind of beat up loaner kit. Yeah. And the loaner kit was the old Keller shells. Wow. Not realizing it at the time that they would be like a big deal now. Yeah. I still have that first kit that was given to me in the room next door. Yeah. And it's their Keller shells. I retired them to the studio years ago, my studio. I won't even take them out of here. But those shells that kit was on the Tribal Tech record and the Frank Gambale record. Wow. And these different records that I've done is that kit. So sometimes people will request that kit. And I'm like, yeah, as long as you come to the pad. It has to pay like an extreme perverse amount of money for me to take them out to record them somewhere else. Definitely. But I recorded with them all the time back then. But the funny thing is that John Good gave me the drum endorsement on behalf of DW. I went and got that red kit, the one I have in the other room, and I loved it so much that I didn't go back for like a year and a half or 2 years to DW.
For what he was originally going to give you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and they said, nobody does that. I said, well, I'm very happy with these. They go, well, you can keep them. It's like, come and pick out your kit. Because I'm thinking, I got to give them back. Yeah. Because like, I didn't think they were going to. So finally, when they spelled out, like, no, like, keep them. And then I was like, wow, okay. So finally, I went over and picked out the shells. And I explained the color that I wanted, the sun, like the color in the sky that you see when the sun is rising. That's the color I wanted, like that orange. That's cool. And so they called it Joey's Sunrise or the Heredia Burst or something like that. And it's a pretty well-known kit because I've used it on a lot of stuff. It's usually my go-to kit because it's so beautiful and it means a lot to me. Yeah. And on live concerts and stuff. That's cool. And so that's in the back room. Yeah. It's stacked on top of each other over there. It's really, really cool. And so, I just tried to make sure that I played well and did a good job. That was my priority, to make an artist sound like $1 million. Yeah. And if extra benefits came my way,
Yeah.
like
Why not?
another drum set, or this company wanted me, and then Sabian did the same thing. They hit me up, and 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 I would try to build a rapport originally with DW and with Sabian before they had given me endorsements. I would say, "Oh, I'm doing a TV show. I'm doing the Johnny Carson show with Tania Maria or Sergio Mendes or somebody or one of these TV shows. Can I use one of your drum sets, or can I use a set of cymbals for the show? And I'll just need them for a day, so I can. The turnaround will take 2 or 3 days. By the time I pick them up, we do the show, and then I return them.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, cool. So I feel that building relationships like that. Oh, I'm doing this video for this thing. Can I use your item? That would work a lot more cool than say, give me something,
Exactly.
and then I'm going to use it on this video. It's like,
Yeah.
don't do it that way.
Yeah.
Have some respect and tell them that you would like to showcase their guitar or their
Right.
bass or their cymbals or whatever,
Yeah.
and that you'll return it immediately.
Yeah.
And guess what? When they see people being gentlemen about that sort of issue, the companies are more happy to
Right.
accommodate you or give you stuff if they see fit. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
Those are the words I have about getting in endorsements.
No, that's good. That's good. I think it's something that a lot of musicians, not just drummers, but just anyone who plays an instrument needs to hear, that it's not. I think the misconception is that once you're signed to a company, you get everything for free, and it's just not.
Yeah, well, there were always different endorsements. There were always the triple A or the big
Exactly.
A endorsements, like people like myself, we've never bought anything, and we're lucky in that respect.
Yes.
Very, very lucky.
Yes.
We worked really hard for it, and then there were other levels of endorsee kind of plans, right? You'd have the A endorsement or the B endorsement or the C endorsement, but somehow those that had to pay a cost thing, but they were still affiliated with the company, seemed to think that before they had any name gigs really under their belt, or quite a few name gigs, that they could ask for a higher endorsement. You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah, definitely.
it's a tough thing. I mean, the drum companies are any company, they're a business, and that particular business of music is hurting, as you know, since the last economic crash.
Right.
Things have changed a lot. A lot of the drum companies dropped a ton of their endorsers because they just couldn't afford to give them free stuff or even at cost stuff anymore.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's
No, thank you, Joey. That's good. That's good. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your sound. One thing that I from the Live Lee record with the Joey Heredia trio, your usage of the 8-inch tom, and not only that, but that's kind of customary for you to always use an 8-inch tom. Why do you always go for that over the 10?
That's a good question. Like this kid here that they gave me, the Purple Rain kit, I call it because it's purple. It's really beautiful.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and it's got an 8 on it, and the company knows that I dig 8s as well, because I didn't even ask for the kit. Right? They were like, "Hey, the last time you were at the at DW at the factory a year or two ago, you saw this purple kit and you flipped out like, what a beautiful kit." But I didn't say give it to me or made any mention of it. And then they called me out of the blue and they said, "Remember that kit you saw a couple years ago?" And I said, "Yeah, I love that color." And then they said, "Well, it's yours if you want it. We know how much you love 8s, and it starts at an 8." Wow. And they're actually little drums. It's an 810.
It's a 16, right?
Well, look at the 12-inch floor. It's a 12-inch floor. It's not even a 13, 14, or 15. It's a little 12-inch floor. The kick drum is a 16, and the cool thing is that it comes with a double kick drum setup. There's another 16 kick drum for that kit. So it's actually a double kick drum set. Dang. I think they had it on display at a PASIC show 2, 3, 4 years ago, maybe more. So it was a novelty-looking kit. It was small, 8, 10, 12, with two 16-inch kick drums. But yeah, it was always my thing, like, like say I can remember in my earliest days is going to see drummers play, and then the 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 song would finish, and the drummer would just be bashing on all kinds of shit to end the song. And I said, yeah, but if you're doing like a jazz song or a fusion tune, why does everything have to end like at 1,000 degrees on the volume scale? Why couldn't it, if there was piano involved or whatever, why don't you just let some cymbals ring and let it go and then not play anything?
Yeah.
And let other people end the tune instead of the drums ending the tune with a big bang. So I started doing little things like that. And then I thought, well, all the drum sets back in the day started at 10 or 12.
Right.
And there was this guy named Gary Grimm, if I remember, and he made custom drums for Valley Arts, which was a music store in the Valley back in the day that all the guitar players and the drummers would go to, and the bass players too. And looking at that kit now reminds me of this guy. Gary would say, yeah, I'm making a kit, a 22-inch by 18 kick drum. And, nobody was really doing that yet. They were by 16, but they weren't by 18 yet. And he says, yeah, and I'm starting it with an 8. An 8, wow, can I check it out? And then I loved it. I loved the sound because it was, the 8 was a higher pitch, so it cut over certain things. It started to roll at a higher place so that you can still go low, but you could have a longer fill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
the fact that I was getting so much into Cuban rhythms at the time, I thought, oh man, an 8 would be killer.
Yeah.
Right up as the first one, and I can put a set of timbal
Right.
over on the left, and then I can chase it with 2-3 toms or 1 tom as a floor, or put another rack, a 10. Right. So since the beginning, all my kits were always sent to me. Like DW just sent me a couple months ago the new Cherry Spruce kit.
Nice.
That I'm actually going to use this week of NAMM. I'm going to use it at the Baked Potato, and I'm going to use it with the NAMM Latin Blowout. It's a gorgeous kit. Yeah. I got it in the back set up, and I have an 8 to it, but I'm going to use a 10.
Okay.
And a 14 and a 16.
Nice.
So I use it.
Yeah.
8 or 10 up, a 14 with legs on the right, and a 16 with legs on the left.
Nice.
I also had the 8 because back then I would have a set of timbales, like I said, close to it. So and those higher pitch drums speak really well.
Right.
Now I'm considering putting a 10 up on occasion, and I have a 16-inch floor to my left almost all the time now without a set of timbales. And then I put one high-pitched timbale to the right, like there, of the floor.
Yeah, I see that. That's the Tito Puente model, right?
Yeah. And it's just to try to get away from what I and a lot of guys did for years, which is play a kit with a set of timbal to the left. So I said, I'm going to X the kit. I'm going to X the snare drums. I would have 1 or 2 snare drums to my left, and now all the kids are using second snare drums. There was nobody using auxiliary snare drums back in the day because nobody really made small auxiliary snare drums. And me and maybe 1 or 2 other guys that names I can't even remember were using small snare drums. It wasn't uncommon for me to go to a gig with 2 or 3 auxiliary snares to the left.
Yeah.
Like a 10-inch, a 12, a 13, and then my 14 by 6.5 in front of me. But then once everyone started doing it, like about 15 or so years ago, I just said, I'm going to stop using snares over there, take 1 snare, and I'm going to use a 16-inch floor with legs on my left. And it's interesting because I come up with other stuff I never played before, and it's still coming up. And it makes it really interesting for me to play timbal over to the right and have maybe 1 or 2 cowbells out over to that side besides the one over my kick drum. Yeah. So I'm experimenting still with different places to put them, but I really like the configuration of doing that. On this kit, in lieu of not having a big 16-inch floor, I put an a 12-inch piccolo, DW piccolo tom with a really thick head on it. Put 2 rings on top of it, 2 Evans rings, and then a kick drum mic, and it sounds like a kick drum.
Yeah.
It's lower than that kick drum, and people all think that it's a triggered kick, but it sounds unbelievable. So, I've been exploring with those things. Funny that you should mention sound. My sound aside from that was usually always using a 14 by 6.5 metal snare, preferably a brass snare.
Okay.
Or a brass that was maybe sprayed black or whatever. My tribal tech snare, which people have hit me up to buy it over the years, but I won't sell it, is a 14 by 6.5, what's called the black chrome. But they stopped making it because they had to spray it, and the process of spraying it was harmful to the environment.
Yeah.
And in order to fix that, it wasn't worth their fixing it because they wouldn't make any money. So now in recent years, they came up with a model like that one, which is 14 by 8, and it's a black nickel over brass.
Wow.
But I don't think it's sprayed on like the other one was.
Yeah.
But it's pretty killer snare. So in my constant quest for trying to come up with sounds as a studio drummer, I didn't always stick with the 8 up on top. I have it in that with my Keller shells, but I have a jazz kit in there, which is a 12 and a 13. And it's a Rogers, old from the 70s Rogers kit. It's actually the kit I used on the Frank Gambale live record.
You have like 3 drum sets set up, right?
Yeah, and then my first kit, which was a Slingerland kit, that was my first drum set. That's in there as well.
Wow.
And that's a 12, 13, and 16. Different sessions will ask me to play different things.
Yeah.
I'm not affiliated with anyone but DW, but I have a Black Beauty snare, for example, in that room because producers ask for it,
of course,
oftentimes.
Of course.
But I also have like really killer DW snares that I would prefer to play in a minute over the Black Beauty snare anytime. My snares sound better than the Black Beauty, in my opinion.
Definitely.
But it's like some producers are just stuck on, no, I want a Black Beauty.
Right.
It's like, but this snare and this snare and this snare sound better than that. No, this is what I want. So, there it goes. But in 2013, a buddy of mine that was with Evans at the time hit me up and said, man, you really should check out this new 360 thing that we're doing.
Yeah.
I said, well, I don't like Evans because the collars are inconsistent, and I never liked them because the collars, not only are they inconsistent, but they didn't sound good because of that inconsistency. You couldn't tune them well. They wouldn't stay in tune. They didn't sound that great. But then with this 360 thing that they did, he sent me a few heads, and I said, what's going on? And then I said, can you send more? So this room that's in this, behind these doors, was stacks of drum heads from the ground up to almost the ceiling, like all through the room. Because I kept saying, send me some more of this, send me that, send me this other thing. So I got to know Evans pretty well, I have to say. Even the company will send guys over on occasion. There's someone interested in playing our Evans, can he go to your pad and check it out?
Yeah.
And I love showing the boys all the kits that you've seen in my studio in the back, which is a live playing room / flamenco room, because I got deep into flamenco 10 years ago. There's stacks of drums, and each stack of toms has a different configuration of toms, Evans toms, in order so that the kit could be actually for a certain genre, for example.
That's cool.
So, one kit is a rock kit, and it's got the what's the Evans one? The UV.
Okay.
The original UV, the single ply, and that's for that rock kit. And then I have other Evans J1s on top with a Reso 7 on the bottom. They're thinner than Ambassadors, but they're not as thin as a Diplomat.
Okay.
So it makes for a really like killer jazz sound. Like super killer.
Yeah.
There's a kit that's outfitted with that. There's
Nice.
another kit outfitted with what maybe would be the equivalent of an Emperor, and it's called a G2. And they're clear G2s to get a little bit more stick attack, clear instead of coated, but then having the double ply, and those are great for my R&B gigs or certain funk gigs, gospel gigs. I have another kit that's for, I like to say it's my church gig. I'm not a church guy. I'm not a religious guy. I'm very much a reborn atheist, but I have a church kit, meaning like, you know how the acoustics in a church are like, you just do that and it's all over the room. So it's a DW PDP kit with a double ply head on the top and a different double ply head on the bottom.
Okay.
So the note is of the sustain of the note is real quick.
Yeah.
Like you would love them if I think you play a lot of church gigs and gospel gigs. Yeah. So like if you use, I'd be curious to see if that kit wasn't decent. Maybe one day you could pick it up and
try it out.
Try it out. Yeah. Because people won't call me for church gigs. But maybe you could try it out and tell me what you think. Because that's, when someone says, yeah, the acoustics are really funky in this joint, it's kind of like a church. Then I send that kit out.
Yeah.
And all the kits and so the point is that for years I still love Remo. That's what I always knew from the very beginning. Remo's like super killer. That's like I developed. It's a good way of learning what your drums are capable of. Remo's got all these frequencies going way up and all these frequencies going way down. Evans hones in a little bit more. Exploits the bottom end, tapers the high end a little bit, so it gives you more of a worked on sound. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Like it's already defined.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay.
And for the kick drums, that's killer. For snare drums, it's unbelievable. They make a snare head called the Heavyweight, which is a double ply with a coat and a reverse dot. Yeah. And throughout my career, I never ever thought I would ever play another head other than an Ambassador coated, much less like a double ply. I wouldn't touch double ply for the life of me on a snare. But on my snare drums, that Heavyweight snare drum head is like you see God with that one. So it's in most of my snares. And when that happened and, certain heads that I tried on the kick drums and I tried all these different options, I must have been in this pad for 2-3 months prior to signing with Evans. Just every spare moment I had like 2-3 kits in this room, 2 kits in that room, 3 kits in that one, and the room in the back had another 2. Just changing heads. Yeah. Oh, I'm going to try these. I'm going to try those. And finally, it pained me to make the move, but I had to make the move. Because in my opinion, Evans just has more options. Right. And as drummers, we rely on options to be able to do what we need to do.
You want to be as versatile as you can, Yeah.
Definitely. And we want to even create the illusion that we're doing something to be able to get the job done. Yeah. So that's what prompted me to make the move in 2013, and I'm still very happy with Evans, and it's expanded my whole thing. Before I thought I knew it all. Well, I'm Joey Heredia. I'm this old now. I've seen it. I've done it all, and I kind of have. But there's always room for like new and improved versions of yourself, and it really opened my mind. That's good. And that together with the fact that I started teaching at LACM has, I see what the kids like to do. I ask them their opinion. What are you doing as a drummer? What heads do you like? They come over and they're blown away. And they already recognize certain things that I didn't recognize till later with Evans. Oh yeah, I've been using that Evans head for such and such amount of time. And these are students. So it's nice to see. I think there's enough room for everyone to exist, you know.
Yeah.
If people love Remo, stay with Remo. I mean, or play both of them. I just happen to think that there's just more options.
Yeah, definitely.
It makes it a lot more fun for me to express myself.
That's good.
And those 8-inch toms and the singing another way.
No, they sound great. Especially, I mean, you know, I came to know about you through the
8-inch thing.
Yeah,
it's funny because someone else mentioned that a year or two ago at a drum show. You know, the drummer with Bruno Mars, his brother. Bruno's brother.
Eric.
Yeah.
Eric Hernandez.
Yeah, so we kind of met formally at a gig. Someone said, yeah, and he, you know, and they said, yeah, he's Bruno Mars' drummer.
And he uses the 8-inch tom.
Well, I don't know if he still does, but he says, no, man, we know who you are, man. He was like, you know, he's got a cool way, the way he talks, right? And he was like, yeah, you know, we noticed when you were using 8 and me and other cats jumped on the 8 for a while. I don't know if they're still doing it.
I think he still does. He just finished his tour not too long ago, I believe.
But he mentioned it, and it made me really happy because I was like, oh, you're like my new best friend. and I haven't seen him since, but I'd like to tell him, maybe if he sees this, you know, thank you tell him thanks for the positive, you know, words on that I helped in some way.
Definitely.
Do something, whatever it might have been, for a moment, maybe. Yeah. But that was cool of him.
That's awesome. What would be your word of advice for not just drummers, but musicians that are trying to get their careers going and have the longevity like you have, you know, doing music as long as you've been doing it? What would be your recommendation? What would be your advice for them to focus on and stay committed to?
For me, it's a lot of things, but I always made it a point to play different genres of music, and actually confidently say I think I know more genres of music than just about any drummer or name drummer out there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of drummers I love, believe me, and I give it up to them. And then the newer guys that I really love, and I give it up to them. And, you know, they might be, one might be a fusion drummer, another guy's a rocker. And I try to dance and bounce between all of these genres. But, you know, I got deep into the Tower Power type of vibe in high school. Mm-hmm. It graduated into a little bit of rock at the time in high school to get some Black Sabbath and Zeppelin under my belt. And then I got into big bands, you know, religiously. So I played them really well back then, and I was reading really well at the time. And then that bounced into, you know, perfecting Cuban stuff and Brazilian stuff because I was traveling with Tania Maria. And then, you know, doing records with people like Poncho Sanchez, with Sergio Mendes, you know, with Steve Lukather from Toto. He and I have a record together called El Grupo. And that was with Oscar Cartaya on bass and Steve Weingart on keys from Dave Weckel's band. And I put that band together, right? And so, and in climbing up the ladder in regards to genres, I would put like 3, 4, 5 years aside to try to learn that genre while I was doing all my other work, if that makes sense, right? And so like 10 years ago, I got deep into flamenco as a matter of point that I wanted to learn something that no other name drummer knows. Nobody knows the flamenco stuff like I do because I put 10 years into doing gigs behind singers, killer guitar players and dancers. So I still have so much to learn, but I've gotten under my belt a lot of the language of the feet, of the cajon, the flamenco cajon specifically, and all that stuff. And so that I can bounce from a cajon gig. There's only 3 of us in LA that play flamenco cajon. Like in all of LA, with all the millions of people out here, there's only 3 of us that get called to do all the gigs and the shows and anything that has to do with flamenco cajon. Nobody else. And nobody else jumps on it, I think, because they're afraid, because it takes a long time. You have to devote a lot of time. I think devoting time and reinventing yourself as a player every 5 to 10 years is the only way you're going to get longevity, because you can stay on the map, but you have to reinvent yourself.
Yeah.
And you got to reinvent yourself with a new genre.
Yeah.
It's got to be another genre that you don't know, that you don't know well, and you have to own up to that you don't know it, and try to get to know it better, at least to the point where you can converse with other musicians in that area. And, and that's what's kept me going. I'm not a rich man by any means. I have a cool pad with 2 studios in it, and Pro Tools studio here with a great board, with a Logic rig in the back for all the live recordings.
Yeah.
But that's that room that I put together in the last 2 months. That's the beginning of my new reinvention of being able to record killer videos in my production house called Groove Gallery Burbank, which is going to start spitting out videos that were done in the back with different artists that I love. So I have a new band together, trio called Punk Jazz, with Benjamin Shepard on bass, who also plays with Peter Erskine and Billy Childs, and Steve Weingart on piano. And I've got that group. I've got my new salsa group that will be playing at Tuesday night's Latin Blowout. Coming up on Tuesday. And that's called Timbala, which is like a salsa con timba kind of
that's cool.
Grupo with 4 singers, trombone, conga, me on drums and timbal, and it's a fabulous little group. And so we're going to try to make something of that, and try to go back and reinvent myself by taking some things that I grew up with and try to make them better.
Exactly.
Now that I'm a little older, and see where it goes.
Yeah.
Awesome. Always a challenge.
Joey, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing this time and just the knowledge and the wisdom and the stories that you have under your belt for years and years of doing music. It's pretty incredible, and it's an honor for me because I've been trying to. When I was younger, as I mentioned to you before, I always would want to go see you guys, the trio, and I never got a chance to.
Yeah, because you were young.
Yeah, I was young. I couldn't
but
get
the CD floats around out there. In fact, most of it's on YouTube. It's called, what is it called?
I have it.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, I have it.
Okay.
I have it on CD, actually. Lavely, right? Live or something like that?
Lavely Live, or Mendoza Heredia Neto Live in LA, I think.
Yeah. I've always known it to be, though, I always call it the Joey Heredia trio, but
yeah, and then other people refer to the bass players. I'll refer to it as the Mendoza trio, or Joey's and Marco's and Joey's trio.
Yeah.
We started it together in Lavely, and that's another thing. You can't wait for the phone to ring.
Right.
You have to do it. You just gotta call your friends if you love a certain style of music. Call the friends that are in that style of music or that love that too or want to get better at it, and then jump on it and get a gig, a residency, a gig somewhere where you're, even if it's not paying much money, don't be concerned with that.
Right.
Just play music and be happy.
Cool.
And then it'll lead to wonderful things later,
Definitely.
But thank you.
Joey Heredia, thank you so much. This is episode 11. Sir Kevin Says. We will see you guys next time. Thanks for checking out episode number 11 with Joey Heredia. Episode number 12 comes out this Friday. If you are a fan of Michael Jackson and Latin music, you definitely want to check this one out. All right, guys. See you guys then.